Professor Faure, you are one of the leading experts on international negotiation. And you came to CERIS in order to deliver a session on negotiation, but also on negotiation with terrorists. So my first question would be about the concept of terrorism. Why do you define it as an asymmetric war?
Now, we have a phenomenon which is rather new in many ways. In the current form, it's asymmetric warfare. How do we come up with these situations? First of all, in ordinary wars, you have two sides. You have one country with an army, resources, cannons, guns, airplanes, warships, etc., and similar situation with the other country. And everyone knows roughly about the resource of the other, knows where they are, know the other country, etc. We know the enemy, we know what he has, we know what he wants, we know what he's doing. We have enough intelligence to gather information about that. Fine, I mean, this is traditional warfare. Now, we have something very different with asymmetric warfare. We have, on the other side, an enemy. We don't know where he is. We don't know how he's going to strike. We don't know when we don't know much about his real goals. He has no territory. We don't know where to strike. We don't know much. So it's asymmetric in this way. It's also asymmetric in the way that he's usually very weak compared to a nation, the resources of a country, but is very effective in the way that he uses the terrain to multiply the effect of what he does. He mixed with the population, for instance. He strikes with unusual means which are considered as usually immoral, like using bombs, like using suicide bombers, like taking hostages, like doing things that leave populations a little bit harmless and helpless, I would say. And it's something which makes things so imbalanced that we have an asymmetry. This finish with symmetric situations. The enemy is someone we don't know much, is invisible. And that brings a lot of uncertainties, a lot of problems, a lot of difficulties, and we have to face that because this is what's happening now, especially with terrorism.
My second question will be on war on terror, or probably more precisely, war against terrorism. Is it possible to win such a war, and what have to be done in order to fight terrorism effectively?
Yes. Well, it's not enough today to be a big nation, to have a lot of resources, to be winning a war on terrorism. Just because, first of all, there is no such a thing as a war on terrorism. It's a war against terrorist groups. And these people are not easily spotted. So when the enemy is invisible, how can you handle the situation? How can you strike? You have to do something else than just strike. This famous article was published in 1975 after the difficulties met by Americans in Vietnam. The Vietnamese situation was very interesting because it's already a asymmetric situation. We had on one side a guerrilla movement, on the other side a regular army. And normally, if you want to get rid of a guerrilla, you need a lot of resources. The Americans didn't learn enough, I believe, from the Brits. The Brits managed to get rid of the guerrilla in Malaysia, which was at that time Malaya, after World War II. There was a lot of terrorist groups controlling the jungle in Malaya, and the Brits had a policy and considered that they had to bring into the battlefield 9 soldiers for one guerrilla. It shows how imbalanced are the resources and how much you need just to have some reasonable hope of getting rid of the guerrilla warfare. Second, we know today that if you are taking care of terrorist issues in your own country, you're a government, you're an official authority, there is someone, you know, he might be a terrorist. You have to know more about him. You have to follow him. You have to check what he does. You have to look after him, etc. And you know how much it takes? 15 people if you want to watch days and nights what he does. 15 people. You cannot do that with the thousands of terrorists. I mean, this is something which is so costly, so difficult, that really it brings another difficulty for every country. This is why a big country is not necessarily winning over guerrilla warfare just because this is a very specific type of war where you never know where the enemy is, especially in Vietnam. The enemy was among the overall population, hiding itself. And at night, people who were during the day wearing maybe a uniform, serving the American military, at night they were guerrillas. So how to handle that? It's extremely difficult. They benefit of the terrain, of the context, of the population, of many things. And finally, one thing which is very important is that if they don't lose, it's like if they were winning. There is a sort of moral obligation for a country, for a nation to get rid of terrorism. If the country, the government cannot, then they are shown as weak, incapable, and then, of course, they lose a lot of their own legitimacy. On the other side, the terrorists, they just need to go on spreading the fear, the terror, disorganizing the country. They just need to go on like this. They need to survive. That's enough. And the other side, the official authorities need to win. If they don't win, then the other side, at some stage, will be the final winner. This is what happened typically in Vietnam. And this is what many terrorist groups expect in the long run in Middle East, in Central Asia, now in sub-Saharan parts of Africa. And they have a chance to manage and serve successfully their own purpose, no doubt about that, because they have some rational means facing governments. Local governments are totally unable to manage anything. If you take countries, I can give names even, if you take countries like Yemen, like Somalia, like Niger, like Mali, I mean, they're totally incapable to handle this type of situation. So in a way, they're already winner. And the future is clear. Their strategy is paying. There is a payoff. Of course, if you look at the Middle East, if you look at Palestinian and Israeli, it's another story. But again, I mean, imagine how much resources the Israelis have to put in one situation to counterbalance and neutralize terrorist issues. We had also recently the negotiation between Israeli and Hamas, a terrorist group, about the Shalit soldier who's been kept as a prisoner, detained by Hamas for several years, and then he was exchanged against 1,000 terrorists. So it told how much it's pay off, you know, such a asymmetric situation. Small needs, but compared to the small needs, maybe sometimes, but not so small for the whole group, then small resources, but huge outcomes, of course. One soldier against 1,000. Not bad. So it pays off, terrorism. In some cases, like in Sri Lanka, for a time, the Tamil Tigers, they controlled almost half of the country. Almost half of the country. They went far beyond their ethnic border. And they even had a war fleet, which is unusual. You don't expect that. But they could move quite freely. They reorganized themselves as a state. Incredible, but true. So there's a lot of things that are possible with small means, and that keeps hope for any terrorist group and gives them impetuous incentives to go on and using their terrible means for serving their purposes.
My final question would be on negotiation with terrorists. Do you believe that it is necessary to start a negotiation process with terrorists, and what could be the possible outcome of such a negotiation?
I believe it's important. It's essential to be able to discuss with terrorists, which means for them to negotiate. We're not there to teach them morals. They will not listen to that. It's not acceptable. The only thing which is sometimes acceptable is a negotiation, especially if they take hostages. The purpose is not exactly to negotiate, but we can bring them to the negotiation table. Actually, when terrorists take hostages, it's very simple. They dictate their conditions and say, you have to do this, this, and this, and then you'll get back your hostages. Your people, they say usually. Okay, and then we can explain that we don't have enough resources to do it, that maybe we could do otherwise, etc., and we start developing a negotiation process. Okay, that's a possibility. Otherwise, if we don't negotiate, we keep isolating them. If we isolate them, we have no influence on them. So whenever possible, it's better to negotiate, just to have some influence on them. If it's a situation of hostage-taking, fine, in that case, our first priority, our major goal is saving lives. We have to save the life of the hostages. So we have to negotiate, otherwise they will never give them back to us. So, okay, in that case we negotiate. If we speak not about a hostage situation, but if we consider, for instance, a terrorist movement in a country who use suicide bombers, who put bombs, cars with exploding everywhere, spreading fear, disqualifying the government. If the government wants really to keep things under control, he has to think about long-term views and long-term solutions. One of them is simply to try to reintegrate the terrorist group within the political current structure. Maybe by changing something in the structure, maybe by rewarding them if they accept to give up violence. And that's essential again. That has been done successfully in quite a few cases. I'm thinking about the Maoists in Nepal. Now they are part of the political normal game, I would say. You can also consider in Egypt, 10 years ago, the Jama Islamia was a terrorist group that has been finally reintegrated into the political regular structure. And that's mean that they have given up violence. You have to give them something in return. What the government in Egypt has given them is to free prisoners against some commitment from them not to resort anymore to violent means. And this has been implemented rather fairly, properly, decently until now. So it's not bad. I mean, there are many ways to negotiate many opportunities, and we should never lose any opportunity, because dialogue is meant to not just to solve short-term problems, but to reconstruct the balance of a society, reintegrate groups, so that the society can again deal in a more, I would say, peaceful way with its own internal problems. What I would like also to say is that the military action, the SWAT action to fight, kill, can be understandable. No doubt that we have to fight terrorism. But the final answer is not that, because if you don't address the roots of the problems, even if you kill some terrorists, you'll get more and more involved at some stage. You have to address the roots of the problems. And that has to be done through discussion, through negotiation. I know that normally states, governments don't like to negotiate with terrorist groups because it would give them some status, some official recognition that they don't want to give. Governments negotiate with governments, not with gangsters. But they have to find ways still to interact with them, influence them. So they use sometimes unofficial ways. And they speak not about negotiation, but about talking. Talkings without making concession. We're not naive. We know that in reality there are always discussions with concession, and that means negotiations. But it's a matter of legitimacy. They don't want to acknowledge that terrorist groups can have enough legitimacy to be an acceptable counterpart in the discussion. But in fact, whether we like it or not, we have to discuss with them. Otherwise, we lose all influence, and we cannot really contribute to a better balance of the society, and especially solving, those dramatic problems that have pushed for a while terrorists to behave the way they do.